That morning, she held the needle with hands that trembled, not from old age, but from haste. As if she knew time was running out, and there was a promise that needed to be fulfilled before it was too late. "I must embroider before time tires of me," he whispered, selecting threads from a worn cardboard box. I didn't know it, but those would be the last words she would ever say to me standing up. What I discovered in that unfinished embroidery, stained by a single tear that dried on the fabric, will make you understand why some promises can only be fulfilled with a needle and thread, and why true love sometimes hides in the... Because today, you're going to hear about the quietest promise I've ever seen anyone make, and how it completely changed the way I understand what it means to let go. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that begins without warning, meaning nothing will ever be the same again. The sun streamed through the window as usual, the coffee steamed on the table as usual, and the sound of scissors cutting fabric echoed through the house with that comforting familiarity only old homes can possess. But there was something different in the air, a quiet urgency I couldn't quite put my finger on. My grandmother sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by colorful scraps and spools of thread that looked like little soldiers lined up, awaiting her orders. Her fingers, wrinkled with age but still dexterous, selected each color with the care of someone selecting the words for a prayer. "Come here, my daughter," he said without taking his eyes off his work. "I want you to see this." It was a delicate lavender sprig embroidered in lilac thread, with flowers so real they seemed to leap from the fabric. But something was incomplete. The stem was half-finished, like a sentence cut off in mid-sentence. "It's beautiful, Grandma," I commented distractedly, more interested in the radio program playing softly in the corner. She stopped embroidering and looked at me with those eyes that seemed to hold the weight of all the stories she had ever lived. "I must embroider before time tires of me," she repeated, and this time there was a deep sadness in those words. I didn't understand. How could I? I was too busy with my busy life to realize that some phrases are goodbyes disguised as casual conversation. The next day, she woke up feeling different. With a low fever, her body felt heavy, and her breathing was labored. "It's just a cold," the doctor said. "Rest and she'll be better." But the days passed and she didn't get better. On the contrary, she seemed to be slowly saying goodbye to the objects, the rooms, the routines that had given rhythm to her life for so many decades. The house revolved around her rest. Medications were scheduled at precise times. Visitors spoke in whispers. Pillows folded and refolded so she could be comfortable. And there, in the corner of the chair where she always sat to embroider, the bag of unfinished cloths waited patiently. It was on one of those quiet afternoons that curiosity overcame respect. I opened the bag and found the lavender embroidery, exactly as she had left it, with the needle still stuck in the fabric and the lilac thread coiled, like a question mark stitched in time. The flowers were almost ready, each petal a small miracle of patience and skill. But the stem remained incomplete, as if she had stopped mid-thought. "Finish for me?" Her voice startled me. I hadn't known she was awake. My eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to embroider like you, Grandma." "You don't need to know it like me. You need to know it like you," she whispered, taking my hand with surprising strength for someone so fragile. Everyone embroiders in their own way. The important thing is to embroider with love. I picked up the needle with trembling fingers. The first stitch was crooked, the second uneven, the third too timid. But I continued, guided more by my heart than by technique. When I finished the remaining section, she looked at the embroidery and smiled, a smile full of pride and tenderness. Then a single tear ran down her wrinkled face and fell onto the fabric, right among the lavender flowers. "Now it's complete," she murmured. "Now it has history." That tear dried on the fabric, but left an almost imperceptible mark like an invisible signature, a seal of approval embroidered on memory. Have you ever had to finish something someone special started? Have you ever felt the weight of continuing a legacy with your own hands? 3 days later, she was gone. He slept in the same bed where he had chosen the colored threads and woke in the arms of his heavenly Father. And there on the nightstand, the lavender embroidery held the last moment we shared, a tear transformed into a promise, an ending that was in fact a new beginning. The house was eerily silent after she left. It wasn't just the absence of her voice or the familiar footsteps down the hallway. It was as if the air itself had changed density, carrying a different weight, the weight of unfinished things. The objects remained in the same places, like faithful soldiers guarding positions that no longer needed defending. The kettle on the stove, still with remnants of the last tea she'd made. The dish towel embroidered with chickens, hanging on the same hook as always. The reading glasses on the table, waiting for eyes that would never return. But it was the light-colored wooden embroidery frame that caught my attention the most. It was there, on the little table next to the chair where she always sat to embroider, with the fabric still taut, like a small window into the past. The lavender embroidery, now dry from the tear that had fallen, but eternally moist in my memory. Each stitch told a story, each flower held a moment, and that almost invisible stain where her tear had touched the fabric was like a fingerprint of longing. I stood there, standing in front of that embroidery, unsure of what to do. It seemed sacrilegious to touch her work, but it also felt like abandonment to leave it there, unfinished and forgotten. That's when I noticed there was more thread wrapped around the corner of the hoop, enough lilac thread to complete other flowers, other branches, other memories, as if she'd purposely left material for someone to continue. She knew, I muttered to myself. She knew I would need to finish this. But it wasn't just about finishing an embroidery. It was about understanding a language she had tried to teach me my entire life, and which I, too busy with the rush of the modern world, had never really taken the time to learn. I sat in her chair, which still retained the shape of her body, still smelled faintly of the cheap perfume she'd worn for decades. I picked up the embroidery frame with reverent care, as if holding a sacred relic. The thread was there, waiting. The needle, gleaming and sharp, was ready. The fabric was taut and receptive. Everything conspired to make me understand. This was no longer her work, it was mine. But what was this promise I didn't know I'd made? When did I commit to continuing something I didn't even know I'd started? It was looking at those flowers embroidered with infinite patience that I began to understand. Each stitch represented a day lived. Each color represented a season lived. Each design was a silent way of saying, I was here, I loved, I created beauty where before there was only white fabric. And now, with her gone, it fell to me to be the guardian of this message, not just of the embroidery itself, but of everything it represented. The patience to create beauty little by little, the perseverance to finish what one starts, the faith that each stitch, no matter how small, contributes to something greater. I threaded the needle with hands that trembled with emotion and responsibility. The first stitch was hesitant, almost a question asked of the fabric. The second came more confidently. The third already had the rhythm of a silent conversation with her memory. As I embroidered, memories came like gentle waves. The first time she tried to teach me, when I was 7 and couldn't wait to sit still. The afternoons she embroidered while I did my homework, creating an atmosphere of shared concentration. The time she embroidered my name on a pillowcase and said, "So you'll never forget, that your name is too beautiful to be left out of place. Have you ever felt like you were honoring someone through a simple gesture? Have you ever discovered that love is sometimes best expressed through silence and patience? Each stitch I made was also a discovery of who she truly was, not just my sweet, caring grandmother, but a silent artist who transformed ordinary moments into embroidered memories. A woman who understood that beauty can't be bought. It's created stitch by stitch with her own hands. When I finally stopped to look at what I'd done, I realized I hadn't just completed her embroidery. I'd begun an eternal dialogue between our memories. Her stitches conversing with mine, her colors blending with my choices, creating something that was neither completely hers nor completely mine, but ours. There, in that fabric that now bore the marks of 2 generations, was the promise I didn't know I'd made, to keep her way of seeing the world alive, to preserve her belief that love is expressed in the details, in patience, in the willingness to create beauty even when no one is looking. In the days that followed, I began to see the house differently, as if I'd put on new glasses that allowed me to see a dimension that had always been there, but which I'd never noticed. On the kitchen wall, a dishcloth she had embroidered years ago took on new meaning. It wasn't just colorful chickens decorating the fabric. It was little guardians of joy, embroidered at a time when money was tight, but hope abounded. And the phrase embroidered underneath, "He who sings his stitches chases away his tears," wasn't just a popular saying. It was a philosophy of life stitched with yellow thread. In the bathroom, the towel that had always been there, with the word calm embroidered in small, discreet letters, stood out as a daily reminder she had left for the whole family. How many times had we dried our hands on that towel without realizing it was teaching us, whispering advice through tiny stitches? In the room she shared with my grandfather, a small picture hung on the wall showing 2 birds side by side, their beaks gently touching. Below, embroidered with faded red thread, "Those who wait together, fly together." Have you ever noticed the silent messages people leave around you? Have you ever noticed that love is sometimes expressed in the smallest details? It was as if she had scattered little notes around the house, embroidered reminders of how to live better. Each cloth, each towel, each decorated napkin was a page from a book written with a needle, a life manual stitched with patience and wisdom. And I, blinded by the rush of modern life, had spent years ignoring this textile library she had created around me. I began reading her pages with renewed attention. The apron she wore to cook had embroidered edges with small hearts interspersed with cross stitches, as if each meal she prepared was seasoned with love sewn into the uniform itself. The blender cover displayed flowers that seemed to dance, transforming an ordinary appliance into an object of beauty. But it was while rummaging through her sewing drawers that I found her true testament. Dozens of pieces of fabric with embroidered phrases, some already finished, others just begun. It was like discovering unfinished poems by a beloved writer. "Patience is the most beautiful stitch in any embroidery," said a white scrap with navy blue thread. "Every tear sows a lesson," was written on another piece, this one in silver thread that shone even in the dim afternoon light. "Time does not pass. Time embroiders." I found embroidered in small letters on a corner of fabric that looked like it had been cut from some old dress. I realized then that she wasn't just a woman who embroidered to pass the time. She was a philosopher who used thread instead of a pen, a poet who practiced cross-stitch, a wise woman who left teachings scattered around the house in the form of embroidered flowers and birds. Have you ever thought about how many life lessons we miss by not paying attention to the silent gestures of the people we love? That afternoon, sitting among her textile treasures, I made a decision that would change the way I dealt with her absence. I would learn to read everything she had written with a needle. And more than that, I would continue the library she had started. I took a clean piece of fabric, threaded a needle, and began to write my first page in this new language I was learning. I embroidered a simple yet meaningful word, remember. It wasn't meant to remind me of her. It was meant to make me never forget her. It was meant that every time I looked at that fabric, I would be reminded that true love doesn't need words to be eternal. It only needs hands willing to create beauty, stitch by stitch, day after day. When I finished, I held the embroidered pequeño up to the light from the window and whispered, "Now I can read your language, Grandma, and I promise I'll keep writing in it." It was more than embroidery. It was my first attempt to speak to her in the language she mastered best. The language of love expressed through patience, dedication, and the belief that every small gesture can carry immense meaning. A week after the funeral, when the house finally returned to silence after the condolence visits and bureaucratic arrangements, I decided to do something I'd been putting off. Organize her things, not to erase her presence, but to preserve her in the most dignified way possible. It was in the last room I chose to rummage through, a small closet she used as a makeshift studio, that I made the discovery that would change everything. Inside a small wooden box with a loose lid, the kind that holds objects of little monetary value but immeasurable importance, I found a treasure I didn't know existed. Dozens of spools of thread in every imaginable shade. Some were full, others worn down to the cardboard center. There were scraps of fabric I recognized, pieces from the dress she wore to her cousin's wedding, leftovers from the tablecloth she embroidered for Christmas 3 years ago, a piece of yellowed lace with a name written in faded blue marker. I sat on the cold floor and began to lay everything out with the care of someone handling archaeological relics. Each color told a story that only she knew completely, but which I could guess from the fragments of memory she retained. The bright red spool brought back the image of her embroidering her cousin Anna's party dress. I remember asking her why she'd chosen such a bright red, and she'd replied, "Because parties are for shining, girl, and red is the color of joy that's not afraid to show off." The yellow thread, almost all used, reminded me of the kitchen towel she embroidered when my mother was pregnant with my younger brother. There were small sunflowers scattered along the edge, and she said yellow brought luck to unborn children. Have you ever noticed how certain colors can carry specific memories? How a single hue can transport you straight to a moment you once thought was lost? But it was when I found the dark green thread wound on a nearly empty spool that the tears came without warning. It was the same shade she had used to embroider pine needles on the Christmas tablecloth years ago. I was in my teens and had complained that embroidery was old lady stuff, that I had more important things to do. She didn't take offense. She just smiled with that infinite patience and said, "Each stitch is a light that we light inside ourselves, my daughter. One day you'll understand." Now I understood. Each spool in that box was a light she had lit during decades of silent creation. Each color represented a moment when she had chosen to create beauty rather than surrender to the chaos of the world. There were also loose buttons of all sizes and shapes. Some I recognized from the dresses she'd sewn for me as a child. Others seemed to have come from very old clothes, perhaps inherited from her own mother. It was like finding small jewels scattered among the treasures. And the ribbons, small pieces of satin, velvet, and lace ribbon, each with a unique story. The baby blue ribbon that adorned the first shoe she made for me when I was born. The gold ribbon that decorated the wedding gift she embroidered for her neighbors. The red ribbon she used to tie her hair the day my grandfather proposed. Do you have objects like these? Objects that seem small but carry huge stories? Have you ever been moved by discovering the hidden treasures of someone you love? I spent hours on that floor, cataloging not only the materials, but also the memories each item evoked. It was as if she had left me not just a collection of threads and fabrics, but an emotional map of her life, each color marking a specific territory of joy, longing, hope, or overcoming. When I finally got up, it was already pitch black outside, but inside I felt a new clarity. Those materials weren't just leftovers from old projects. They were raw material for future embroidery, seeds of beauty waiting for the right hands to blossom again. I stored everything in a new, larger, and sturdier box. On the lid, I wrote in neat handwriting, her words in color, because that was exactly what I had found. The words she never said aloud, but which she had expressed through chromatic choices, delicate combinations, and visual harmonies that only she knew how to create. That night, before I went to sleep, I promised myself that every spool in that box would be honored. Every color would be used to create something beautiful, something that would keep alive not only her memory, but her unique way of seeing and transforming the world. It was more than a material inheritance. It was an invitation to continue a conversation she had begun decades earlier, a conversation made of colors, textures, patience, and an unconditional love for the beauty that can arise from the work of one's own hands. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind that makes the soul contemplative. The windows were fogged up, creating a veil between the world outside and the welcoming silence of the house. The radio played an old waltz, the kind that seems to have been born alongside your earliest childhood memories. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she prepared thousands of meals, where she cut fabric for new projects, where I did homework while she embroidered beside me. Spreading the fabric across that history-laden surface felt like the right ritual for what I was about to do. This time, I wasn't going to finish something she'd started. I was going to start something completely my own, but dedicated entirely to her. Have you ever felt the need to create something special for someone who can no longer receive conventional gifts? I grabbed a piece of white linen I found among her supplies, the perfect fabric, clean as a blank page waiting to receive its first story. I drew a simple heart with a pencil, without frills or ornamentation. Inside it, I wrote 3 words that summed up everything I needed to say. You still live. The choice of line was almost automatic. Light pink, her favorite color. She always said that pink was the color of tenderness, that isn't ashamed to be gentle, of love that prefers to whisper rather than shout. I began to embroider with an emotion I hadn't known existed. It was unlike any feeling I'd experienced before, a mixture of aching longing and overflowing gratitude, of palpable absence and eternal presence. Each stitch burned in my fingers with nostalgia, but also warmed my chest with a new certainty. She hadn't completely left. She was there, in that ritual of creating beauty with patience, in the careful choice of colors, in the search for harmony between form and meaning. The first stitch came out uncertain, almost like a question posed to the fabric. The second came more confidently. The third already had the rhythm of a silent prayer. And so, stitch by stitch, word by word, I embroidered not just a heart, but an eternal dialogue with her memory. I cried. It's impossible not to cry when you realize that true love doesn't need physical presence to continue working miracles. I cried for the embroidery afternoons we would no longer have, for the lessons she could no longer teach me, for the conversations that would forever remain incomplete. But I also smiled. I smiled when I realized she had given me the most precious gift anyone could give: the ability to transform longing into creation, absence into art, pain into lasting beauty. By the time I finished, it was almost night. I held the little embroidery up to the lamplight and whispered, "It's not perfect like yours, Grandma, but it's sincere, and it's completely yours." I took the embroidery into the living room and placed it on the small altar we had set up for her, between a photo of her smiling with that genuine joy that had always characterized her, and a candle we had kept lit since the funeral. There, in that sacred corner of the house, my first embroidery dedicated to her found its place. It wasn't just a decorative piece. It was a public declaration that the love I felt for her had found a new language to express itself. In the following days, whenever I passed by, I would stop for a few seconds to gaze at that simple embroidery, and each time I felt the same thing, a profound peace, as if each stitch had also been a suture in the wound left by her absence. Have you ever felt that a simple gesture can carry immense meaning? Have you discovered that creating something with your own hands can be a powerful way to process longing? It was with this first embroidery that I discovered something revolutionary. When we embroider for someone we love, it doesn't matter whether or not they can see the final result. What matters is that in the act of creating, that person becomes present in an almost magical way. Each stitch is a way of communicating with them. Each color choice is a way of honoring their memory. It was as if, through needle and thread, I had found a direct line to eternity, a means of communication that transcends death and allows love to continue flowing, creating beauty, maintaining connections that physical absence cannot sever. That night, before falling asleep, I looked at the embroidery once more and made a silent promise. It wouldn't be the last. It was just the first of many, the beginning of a new personal tradition that would keep the flame of her memory alive through the language she mastered best, the language of love expressed stitch by stitch, with infinite patience and unwavering faith in the beauty that can be born from one's own hands. Today, months after that morning, when she held the needle with mysterious haste, I finally understand the meaning of that tear that fell onto the lavender embroidery. It wasn't just emotion. It was also anticipatory gratitude for knowing that her love language wouldn't die with her. I kept all her embroidery in a box lined with floral fabric, each piece a chapter in the story she crafted through decades of silent dedication. But the unfinished lavender embroidery, the one stained with tears, stayed with me on my nightstand. It accompanies me like a talisman against forgetfulness, a constant reminder that some promises are made without words and fulfilled through gestures that only those who love can fully understand. Have you ever noticed that the most profound promises are sometimes the ones we never say out loud? Every now and then, when I miss her more deeply, I pick up that embroidery and carefully run my fingers over it. There, I can still feel the texture of her stitches, interspersed with my own. There, I can still see the almost imperceptible mark of the tear that sealed our last creative partnership. And whenever I teach someone to take their first stitches, whenever I hear a story that deserves to be preserved, whenever I welcome a memory that someone fears losing, I feel that they are embroidering along with me. Because I discovered something she always knew. Embroidery is much more than creating pretty ornaments. It's a way to stop time, to preserve moments, to transform emotions into something tangible that can resist oblivion. It's a way of saying, I was here, I loved, I created beauty where before there was only emptiness, and leaving that message embroidered into the fabric of other people's lives. The promise I made that morning, without knowing I was making it, continues to be fulfilled with each new stitch. Not just the promise to finish her unfinished embroidery, but the greater promise to keep alive her belief that love is best expressed through patience, dedication, and the willingness to create beauty even when no one is looking. If this story touched a memory in your heart, tell us in the comments. What special memory would you keep embroidered forever? What silent promise would you make to someone you love? Subscribe to the Grandma's Diaries channel. Activate the bell and share with someone who also understands that some of life's most important lessons come wrapped in simple, silent gestures. In the next story, we will talk about faith, flour, and the homemade bread that carried prayers in its own dough. 3 ingredients that transformed a simple kitchen into the most sacred place in the house. We wait for you here, always, with an open heart and firm stitches, ready to embroider another memory into the fabric of time. Because, as she always said, each point is a light that we light inside ourselves, and some lights, once lit, never go out again.